Hi, everyone. Welcome to another session of Youth for Change Youth Empowering Series program. Today, I'm joined with my co-hosts, Jessenia, Cynthia, and Rijin, as well as our guest speaker, Dr. Ghosh. So now let's begin. Mental health can be something that everyone has experienced at a point in his or her life. Mental health connects to addictions such as gaming or gambling. During COVID-19, youth have faced mental health challenges due to isolation, low interaction in social gatherings. If you attended our first session, we've talked a bit about mental health in COVID-19. About me, my name is Hunyah. I'm one of the hosts for Youth for Change Youth Empowering Series. Aside from Youth for Change, I have a blog and YouTube channel called Hunyah Travels, where I like to do different things and give my remarks. So what does mental health mean to you?
Yeah, so I think mental health is, it's a really personal thing and it's different for everyone really, but the whole point of mental health is, being mentally healthy and realizing that there are different steps and things that we can all do to reach that. Of course, not everyone is going to be 100% in the best headspace all the time. There's different challenges and other things that we all experience in our lives, but the main thing is for mental health is to really focus on the positive things and understand and realize that there are, recognize the illnesses that are out there, such as anxiety, depression, a lot of things like that, and really coming up with ways to support your community and support the people around you in solving these issues.
I agree. There's a lot that goes in there. And sometimes it could be related to addictions. We don't even know that when we're even addicted to something, and that can be a cause to mental illness.
For sure.
Yeah, anything you want to add?
A lot of times you don't know what's actually going on within you, and a lot of times you just gotta listen to people surrounding you. If they're telling you that, hey, I think that maybe, do you want to talk about something, or maybe you should reach out for help, you should definitely listen, because a lot of times you don't even know what you're going through mentally.
True. And it's like the way how we perceive. Yeah, Rijin, you want to...
Yes, I was saying I totally agree with what Cynthia was saying in terms of the key aspects of being isolation. So I feel like that's one of the main aspects that we need to take into consideration, just because being in isolation can intensify many of the issues that develop addictions, and that in turn causes many other issues with the mental health. And I feel like reaching out to someone during those times is very crucial, just because you might not know what you're facing, and it might help you just to talk with someone one-on-one conversation, and that getting it out there and getting your things that you're facing and sharing it with someone just allows you to get everything out there. And like I said, it allows you to get over some things that you can't get over when you're by yourself and alone and lonely. So I feel like that's really crucial here, and that it's different for everyone else. That's also a really key thing that we had to talk about.
I agree, because sometimes you just talk. It's not even about taking a medicine, or not even going out to see a psychiatrist. You just need to talk. That's the only way. Sometimes that's all what we need. So
yeah,
here's some of the... Yeah.
I think, sorry to cut you. I think it's super important to also recognize too that if there is someone in your life who you may know or may not know directly is struggling, to always be there for them and to reach out, even if, for example, even if they don't tell you directly or tell you that they're going through something tough, just always checking in every couple of weeks or month, make sure that their mental health is doing okay, and being that supportive friend or mentor, peer that they can always reach out to.
Yeah, I agree. I agree with that a lot, because even for me, sometimes I feel like it's just better to talk to someone I know really close than having to go and talk to someone to someone that I don't know. So that matters a lot in there. So here are some of the facts on youth and mental health. Youth ages 14 to 18 develop addictions in gambling, technology, and gaming. 70% of youth are living with mental health illness by the time they're over 18. By age 24, 1 in 5 Canadians develop addictions, which affects his or her mental health. During COVID-19, anxiety has increased 13% for the youth. And personally, I just want to add one thing. I actually I actually did deal with mental health issues while growing up, like minor. So so I feel like if it's around the ages from 14 to 18, it could be something that occurs to you. Just a little point in there. Anyone want to add anything? And any questions, any thoughts? And what is your opinion? Do you think that mental health has mental health in some point in your life has affected you?
I think it affects all of us for sure. Having to do like my last year of like my year 2 of university from home, it definitely impacted my mental health, I think, because instead of having those other opportunities to socialize or meet with peers, talk to teachers and adults and professors, I had to do it from home instead. And a similar feeling that I was feeling and the rest of my other friends too was that, we didn't have that same social interaction, and sometimes we felt like we were alone or lonely and we didn't have really anyone to rely on. But I think what really helped us get through that tough time and any of those kind of anxious feelings was just relying on one another and supporting each other through it, and understanding that this is only something temporary, even though it has felt that COVID has gone on for too long at this point. There is going to be light at the end of the tunnel. So
I agree. Now moving on to COVID and mental health. So youth and mental health during COVID. So youth and mental health concerns has increased during COVID-19 from ages 15 to 24, with 63.8% of impacts on emotional well-being and learning. 49% of youth are in isolation, and 9% have limited access to mental health services, and 33% was affected by school closures during COVID. So what do you think? Do you agree with these facts, or is there anything you want to add? Comment below, and also give me your opinion, because I'm pretty sure there's something we all experienced during this time.
I feel that the last fact, like it relates to like, a lot of the people here, as like Jessenia like mentioned, right? The school closures impacted, everyone, and just because the transition from in-person to online, it affected, various ways of like, let's say, asking someone for help, right? Remember like after class or so, I would always ask my teachers, help regarding, regarding the lesson, and in that way I was able to clarify, many of the questions I had and problems, and that would allow me to learn and more in depth. But now because of online, there's always that constant feeling that if, are you getting the concept correctly? Are you getting that idea correctly? And that stress that builds up upon you, like for a test or so, and just that fear that, are you, able to grasp that whole concept correctly, was something that I had to deal with a lot just because of my last year of high school. So, one thing that obviously helped me get through those times, just because of the unity and, the friendship. And I feel that it's really crucial, the fact that, if you have people around you that are always supportive and, willing to help you during those tough times, and always there for you, whether it's helping you with a question, or helping you understand a concept. I feel like those times just really helps everyone get over some of the concepts, like especially mental health and some of the concerns that mental health brings.
I agree. That is very relatable, because when you're at home, you're like, in a way it's good, but at the same time it's not good, because you can't go out, you can't exercise, and then eventually you feel like that you feel anxious, right? So I guess we all have those days. Now, Dr. Monty Ghosh, and now we'll begin by introducing Dr. Monty Ghosh. Dr. Monty Ghosh is an internist addiction specialist based in Edmonton and Calgary, working with multiple community-based nonprofit organizations to provide a support for marginalized and racialized populations. He is an assistant clinical professor at both University of Alberta and University of Calgary. Welcome, Dr. Monty Ghosh.
Hey, thanks for having me here, guys. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
thanks for coming. We really appreciate the time.
We look forward to hearing what you have to say about mental health. We have a lot of questions.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I heard this was like a panel discussion. So like, thanks for having me here. Happy to answer any questions you guys might have, engage in some in-depth discussions about what exactly addiction is. Yeah, just in general, like, and I don't know how many people are participating here, addiction is a disease process. And I think that's the one thing that I want to instate with everyone here who's participating today. There's this common misconception that addiction is a personal choice. It's a moral failing, that people choose to be addicted to something, and that just as easily that they choose to be addicted to something, it's just as easy to stop. And we know that it's not. It's a change in the way that our brain actually works and functions. And there's several different reasons for that. And so one of the big things that we know is that there's numerous factors that factor into why people are addicted to substances. Some of it is genetics. Some of it is experiences that people have had as a child, such as trauma. And some of it is because of mental health concerns. Some of it is stress that has happened in the past. All of these issues can sort of lead someone down the path of addiction. And cause them to be addicted to substance. And what addiction essentially is, it's a brain disease that causes permanent changes to cause people to have cravings for substances, lose control of their use of something, leading to consequences further down the road, and have constant cravings for these substances as well. So that's sort of addiction in a nutshell. But I want all of us here to sort of take ourselves into the mind of someone who's addicted to substances. And one of the great analogies I find for this is like sort of the desert island analogy. So for a bit of a background, there's two main parts of our brain that really are effective and are worked during addiction. One is your frontal lobes. This is the part of the brain that is your executive part of the brain. It tells you what's right and what's wrong. It's your center of moral consciousness. It controls your impulses. So this is what tells you not to get angry if you're getting to an argument with someone. It tells you to keep your cool. The other part of the brain is what we call the mesolimbic system. It's the most primitive part of our brain. And this part of the brain exists in other species that are less evolved, if you may. It occurs in, it's the first part of our brain that develops as a child and as a baby, with the frontal lobe developing further along down the lines. And that's the part of the brain that controls addiction. That's part of addiction. It's a part of our reward system. So for example, when a baby is born, the frontal lobe is not fully developed as of yet. And the midbrain, however, is, the mesolimbic system is. And so it tells us through that reward system to keep us alive. So we'll drink milk to survive. It'll tell us to cry when we're getting upset. And that's what keeps us alive and going on. But as we get older, our frontal lobe starts to develop more and more and more. And so we're able to control those impulses of craving for things, of eating impulsively, that things that keep us alive. And it does mature by the age of 25. What's interesting with youth is that that frontal lobe doesn't develop all the way, right, until you reach an older age. And if you're on substances, there's some studies that show that frontal lobe doesn't really fully develop at all. So it's harder to control your cravings for substances as you get older. It's harder to maintain yourself and say no to certain things, to control some behavioral aspects of addiction, which there is some. So the desert island analogy. So if we were to get stranded on a desert island without water, our frontal lobe will tell us to draw a help sign in the sand. It'll tell us to cut down some coconuts in the tree and drink some like coconut for water, or to cut down the palm trees and build a raft. And however, as we get more and more thirsty because of the lack of water, we stop thinking about all these other things. Our frontal lobe turns off and our mesolimbic system, that midbrain, kicks in. And the midbrain is telling us we need to do something to survive, that we're going to die unless we get water. And all you can think about is water, 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 water. And if someone was to show up and say, hey, here's a bottle of water, but you can have a drink, but in return, you have to give us your home, your spouse, your kids, you would turn all of that over just to get that water. And as soon as you drink that water, your frontal lobe kicks back in, you realize you made a mistake. And that's exactly how addiction works. It's like this desperate need for something that needs to keep us alive, that you have, that gets hijacked because of substances and sometimes behavioral addictions as well. And it can be something that's very powerful and very difficult to control. So kind of that's sort of addiction in a nutshell. Yeah, it's a very prevalent disease, right? It's as I think some of the slides have already demonstrated, it's 1 in 5 of us will experience some sort of addiction, and addiction takes different forms. It has different definitions. We have both behavioral addictions and substance addictions. But the key thing here, though, is that it is a disease process. It's not something that we should be stigmatizing. It shouldn't be something that we place judgment on other people for. It can happen to any of us.
Thank you so much, doctor. So I just had a question for you then, relating to addictions and how that's kind of evolved, I guess, in the last year. What would you say is one of the things that, has heightened, I guess, for youth, especially with regards to addictions? And do you have any recommendations or tips on, how they can address that during this time?
100%. So we know there's a great correlation between addiction and mental health. And as you guys had touched on earlier in the broadcast, the more mental health concerns you have, the more depression, anxiety you have, the greater your risk of having an addiction is as well. And so one way to sort of mitigate that is to minimize those risks, right? But it's also to keep yourself in check. So not only should you work on your personal self, on your mental health and your own well-being, but also look out for those 4 C's that we talked about. So that's a loss of control, cravings, use despite consequences. Those are some of the things that you need to really keep ahead of and on top of. And so if you're noticing that's impacting your social life and your family life, and it's impacting, you're starting to avoid work or schoolwork because you're doing certain things, or that people are getting upset with you, or you're having cravings for something, or you can't control it, or you're getting into trouble and you're losing your grades, for example. Those are things that you need to really keep track of on your own well-being. There's a thing called recovery capital that exists out there, and these are like certain key things that you can do to make your life better, that can help decrease your risk of not only having an addiction but also relapsing if you have an addiction. And these are all basically wellness things. There's different domains there of what recovery means, but it means keeping your mental health in check, doing physical exercise, and staying healthy with your body, mind, and soul. It involves doing things that feel good to helping for others, helping others out. It involves making sure that you have a reasonable work life, and that you're reducing stresses in your work life or your school life. It means taking care of your family, making amends, as if you may, with certain family members. It means showing gratitude in some respects. There's different ways and angles you can look at this, but that's just some things you can do in a nutshell to take care of yourself on a day-to-day basis.
I have a question. How are mental health and addictions related to each other? Like, I know there's a lot of services available in mental health and addiction. So how is that one cluster? I'd like to know about it.
Yeah, like, are you in terms of how it interrelates with each other?
Yes.
Yeah, it's kind of like the chicken and the egg situation with addiction and mental health. Mental health issues can spur on addiction because a lot of people use substances to relieve themselves of the mental health issues that they might have, because it does provide temporary respite from that. But also, in the same token, using substances can cause mental health concerns to occur. So, for example, alcohol is a depressant. And so when you drink more and more and more, people can become more depressed, and it becomes very difficult to sort of tease out what's what. We know that if you have depression secondary to substances, if you take care of the substance use disorder or the addiction, then you tend to take care of the mental health concern. Now, if the opposite is true, if the mental health concern is causing the addiction, trying to treat the addiction won't solve the root cause of the problem. You have to treat the mental health aspect as well. And how you differentiate the two can be difficult. So you're out to really tease that out. And some of the things that you can use as a tool, for example, is to determine how it relates to each other temporally. So what I mean by that is that, if I'm with an individual, with a patient, I'll ask them, have you had, before you had your addiction concern, did you have a history of depression and anxiety? And if they say yes, then you can make a safe guess that it's probably the mental health concern that caused the addiction concern. Or if there was a period in time where they were not using any substances or didn't have an addiction, say they were in sobriety for 1 year, you can say, hey, did you have depression, anxiety then when you were off of all your substances? And if they say yes, then you can probably say that's probably the mental health issue that's driving the addiction potentially. The exact opposite, however, is also there as well. So if they say that they only began to get depressed after they started using substances, or they began to have an addiction, then it's a safe guess to say that maybe we should try to treat the addiction first, and then hopefully be able to take care of the mental health aspect too.
We have a question from the audience. Maria Yusuf, she says, how do you address the stigma attached to addressing mental health issues?
Could you repeat that again? Sorry.
Yes, we have a question from the audience, from Maria Yusuf. She said, how do you address the stigma attached to addressing mental health issues?
That's a really good question. And I think it's all about all of us making a stand and taking an effort to show no judgment and be supportive of each other. So the one thing that I think is really important is being open about your substance use or your addiction concerns or your mental health concerns, and not trying to hide it. Again, we hide it as a society because we think that society will think less of us for it. But really we shouldn't. We should be just as proud of that as anything else, because that is just who we are as humans. So I mean, that's one step we can take as a society. Another step we can take is just the language we use. I hear this often. You'll hear someone call someone who uses substances a quote unquote addict. It's a term that we don't use anymore. We don't define someone by the disease that they have or the disorder that they have. We define people by who they are, and it's the disease. They define the disease, not the disease that's defining them. So now we don't say that you have diabetes. You say you're someone who lives with diabetes. We don't say that you're an HIV patient. We say you're someone who lives with HIV. You're not a homeless person. You're someone who experiences homelessness. You are not an addict. You are someone who lives, or someone who lives with substance use disorder or lives with addiction. Now, the little subtle difference is that if you are someone who's using substances, you can call yourself whatever you want to call yourself. And the way I kind of liken that is to it's probably a bad example here, but the N-word, right? We shouldn't be using the N-word at all, but some people who are Black may choose to use that. There is a cultural aspect to it, of course, as well, from hip hop music to I guess I should say similar, like hip hop music. With addiction, there's 12-step programs in which they actively call themselves addicts. Again, we wouldn't want to use those terms. You want to call someone who is using substances as someone who lives with substance use disorder, or someone who's using substances. That's kind of my spiel on how language can help affect stigma, and how we really, if we do the right language, we show the right amount of support, that stigma can be relieved.
That's amazing, that how to humanize the illness with a person and not just like label the person. We have another question from Maria Yusuf, is how can you initiate the conversation with someone who you think might be suffering or maybe on a verge of substance abuse, and how do you help them?
That's a great question. And the key here is to sort of know the signs and symptoms of substance use disorder. So as I mentioned before, there's cravings, there's lack of control, there's consequences that can happen despite all of this. There's all these other aspects that can sort of affect someone's sense of self when you start to see that they're using substances or they have an addiction concern. Once you start to notice that, like, it's really helpful to broach the topic with the individual. So talk to them, talk to your loved one, and say, hey, I have these concerns, but show no judgment. Be there to help, be there to sort of be a guiding hand, and show them that you're there for them, regardless of the decisions that they decide to make. And that's basically the gist of it, is show love and compassion. And be there for them. Don't show judgment. Don't tell them what to do. Don't yell at them. Don't threaten them. Show love and compassion. That can go a long way to helping someone who has a substance use concern. There's things that you can do, such as motivation. You can be like, what are your thoughts on the situation of you using substances? And what are your thoughts on taking care of it? Like, what would you like to do? Give them a range of options that they can choose to, right? And one of the options might be, let's do nothing. One of the options might be, let's go visit the doctor's office or the addiction counselor. Or another option will be, let's go visit another friend. Or another option would be, let's go visit someone that you trust, maybe like a religious leader, or someone in your community that you look up to. So these are things that you can do to engage with some support in the community, and then slowly start to learn where resources are. I mean, the internet is a great resource for that as well, right? In your jurisdiction, just find out where addiction resources are in your community, and ask the individual to engage with those if possible, and be willing to take them to the first appointment, be there to hold their hand. The one thing to be aware of is that when we tackle addiction, we tackle different aspects of addiction. And you really need to sort of approach addiction holistically. So you've got a biological component, which you kind of talked about. One way to mitigate that would be through medications and pharmacotherapy. Things like for opioid use disorder, methadone, Suboxone. For things like alcohol, we have like naltrexone, gabapentin. So medications that can sort of decrease cravings for the substance, much like the cravings for water that we talked about earlier. Another aspect is the psychological aspect, which we also touched on, how we need to really co-manage mental health concerns. But the last aspect is a social aspect. And social aspects can include not only social determinants of health, such as if they're homeless or they don't have identification or they don't have income, trying to get those things for them would be very crucial, but also their social structures, like who are they with? Who is there to support them? We know that being supportive of these individuals is hugely beneficial to them, and can really take them along their journey towards recovery, if that's so they choose. And recovery doesn't necessarily mean abstinence. Recovery means a better quality of life, so that they are optimizing their quality of life, even though they might be still using. I love stories, and in terms of stories and being supportive, I don't know if you guys have ever heard of the Rat Park story. Like, it's a pretty popular story with addiction. Basically, in the 1970s in Canada, in Montreal, there was a scientist, and he put a rat in a box, and there was 2 drips there. There was a water drip that the rat could use, and there was also a drip with heroin. And he found the rats that they put into these boxes would consume the heroin drip until they passed away and died. Now, when they took similar rats and they put them in another box called Rat Park, where there was lots of other rats to play with, where there was food, there was games, there was toys. They also had the water drip, and they also had the heroin drip. They noticed that only 10% of the rats were actually using the heroin drip, and very few of them actually died. So that was very interesting. So they're like, okay, why is this case? What's this phenomenon? And then a way that sort of translated to humans, and again, there's lots of YouTube videos on this and stuff. It was the Vietnam War. So during the Vietnam War, tons of U.S. soldiers were in Vietnam. Opium was a lot easier to find than tobacco and cigarettes, and so there was a lot of U.S. soldiers who were smoking opium overseas, and there was a fear that when the war was over and they'd all come back to the United States, that they would have an opioid concern with these individuals. But what they noticed was that only 10% of them, again, had an opioid use concern. And when they looked at these individuals, when the Veterans Affairs groups in the United States looked at these individuals, they found that they were with their families, they were working, they were being supported and loved, and only 10% of them had issues, despite all the terror, the trauma, the destruction that they saw in Vietnam, the horrors of war. They were doing well. So I mean, the moral of this story essentially is that we need to be supportive of each other. We need to be there for them as a community. We need to wrap our arms around each other and be there through thick and thin, through mental health and addiction concerns, showing love.
Definitely. Yeah, no, I really think that, we touched on a lot of great points, and especially, these days, there are some specifically marginalized communities and communities where maybe the conversation or the topic of mental health isn't as welcomed because, for centuries and throughout history, it's not always has been seen as, an illness, but it's very important to recognize that it is just like a physical illness or something that you are able to see firsthand. A lot of the times that illnesses, you're not able to see them, and they're actually internalized or stuff that we can't see up front. So we have another question actually from the audience, and she's asking, are there any resources available for youth where they can access mental health support privately?
I'm sure there is. There's just, because I just don't know which jurisdictions you guys are all from. I'm guessing Ontario and Quebec. There's tons of stuff out there. You just have to Google it and find it. So lots of private resources. The public ones are a little harder to find sometimes. But the key here is like some resources I think are fantastic for mental health concerns is like the Kids Help Phone. Just calling that line, or the distress center and calling the distress center. Those are things that you can use to get help and seek help where needed. If you're using substances alone, another line that you can call is called the NORS line. It's the National Overdose Response Service. The number is 1-888-6, I think it's 688-6670. And or just Google at www.nors.ca, and there's people on the other line for that can help you out if you have any concerns, so specifically if you're using substances, but if you have other concerns as well, because they'll help sort of case manage you and get you to the right resources in the community and help you search for resources in the community. So, I mean, yeah, tons of resources out there. You just kind of look at it, but I would say that the Kids Help Phone, the Distress Center, and NORS, just call them. They can help direct you to where you need to be. There's also addiction hotlines throughout Canada, and then 211 is another number. That's a really good number to have. I know, especially in Western Canada, whether it's Saskatchewan, Manitoba, BC, 211's a lot of help. I just don't know if it exists out in the east part of Canada.
Awesome.
We have another question from our audience, Maria Yusuf. She's saying, how do you help someone who refuses help?
You know, that's another excellent question. It's just that you got to be there for them, and it's through motivation. And so first and foremost, if someone refuses help, it's not as if you abandon them. It's not as if you just leave them be, or ignore them, or stigmatize them, or kick them out of your lives. You just have to be there for them, and when they're ready, they're ready. Things that you can do to sort of assess if they're ready or not is to ask them questions. And so you know, I'll often train loved ones to be, you know, talk to their loved one and say, hey, you know, on a scale of 1 to 10, how ready are you to deal with this? And if they say a 3, you can say, hey, why did you say 3 instead of a 4 or 5? What'll help you get to a 4 or 5? Why'd you say a 3 instead of a 1 or a 2? It means that you're almost a bit more ready, but what's changed? So those are like questions that you can ask a loved one to see where they're ready or where they're at in terms of their change, and then help them along that process. So say they're not ready to change, and they say they're at 3, you could say, hey, let's work on that then. Like, what can we do together to get you to that 5 or 6 or 7? And it's a great sort of tool to sort of get them to figure out their own process, or even give them an action plan. Like, I mean, these are very clinical skills, but I do this, but you can do this with loved ones as well, and say, hey, you know, how about this? How about we set a date where we go visit someone? Or how about we set a date where you take care of this issue? Or it could be something just like harm reduction. Say, like, so for example, if you know someone who's using drugs at home, substances at home alone, you can say, hey, you know, I just don't want you to use by yourself. I want you to be safe while you're using. So please use a supervised consumption site, or please have a naloxone kit, or please just call the NORS line just so you can be safe, that someone's there to watch over you as you're using your substances, because I don't want you to overdose. I don't want you to have a bad outcome. And that it can be good enough. That can be supportive, being there, showing understanding, and developing trust, and fostering that relationship that you already might have with that individual. Another thing too is that if you are a family member and you're feeling troubled and you're feeling anxious, there's tons of mutual support groups out there. You can join groups like Al-Anon. If you're, you know, your family member can join groups like Mom Stop the Harm. There's lots of groups that are out there that can sort of support family members as well as they deal through this.
Well, thank you. I think, you know, I've been noting down some of the resources that you mentioned, and to everyone who's watching us today. And when we post this on YouTube, we'll definitely be circulating a list of resources too that, are lesser known as well, because I know a lot of the ones I didn't know until you mentioned them. So thank you for that. I think another thing that's sometimes a bit challenging, especially when it comes to younger individuals and, when they're not expressing themselves as much as an adult would be able to, that kind of creates a conflict or a barrier to when you're trying to support them. So we have another question from the audience, and it's for younger individuals. How do you get someone's guardians or caretakers to accept that the child needs help without stigmatizing the conversation?
Yeah, that's a tough one. Like I always believe in giving options to individuals and um, trying to help them without forcing them. And that can be very tricky. And this is sort of an area of controversy. Like some people say that coercion is a wrong thing to do with individuals who are youth. Some people say we should be doing forced treatment. And often they'll seek forced treatment mainly because they believe, again, that we discussed earlier, that frontal lobe isn't completely developed. And there's ethical issues that come along with this. Like, should we be forcing individuals into getting support and help? Should we be allowing personal autonomy to dictate who wants to get help and who doesn't want to get help? And it's super tough. Like, I know I hear parents tell me all the time that they want to force their kid into treatment. They also hear kids who say that they don't think that they have a problem, and they don't know why their parents are forcing this on them. So it's a struggle, I gotta say, and it's really hard.
I have a question.
Yeah.
I know someone who right now, this is actually COVID related and mental health related. She got a vaccine, the first dose, and for that, she said that she's been complaining about her tongue, and because that she's been feeling depressed, and she said she doesn't know what to do. So is that connected to mental health, the way how she's perceiving how the first dose was, or is there a kind of a piece of metal in the vaccine that we should be concerned about? Because I feel this is more of a mental health and a psychological case than just more than just the result of the vaccine. Like, what do you think? Like, what is your opinion?
This is a tough thing. I know this is my unofficial medical advice here, just because I haven't seen this person. I don't know who they're about or what their story is completely. But I've never heard of any sort of symptoms like that from the vaccine, like depression or a metallic taste in someone's mouth. Is it possible? Potentially. I just don't know the answer to that question. But if they feel like they are depressed, it's worthwhile looking into. It's worthwhile checking out and seeking help for it. And whether or not it's vaccine related, it's always a good idea, especially if you're feeling depressed and you're feeling out of it and you're feeling lost, to seek some help, seek some support, see if there actually is an issue by visiting a healthcare professional. And there might be just a temporary thing. It might be a long-lasting thing. The key is just to, if you don't know and it's bumming you out and you're not feeling you're 100%, talk to someone about it.
Thank you. That was very informative.
I have another question about addictions. So I just want to ask, what is your advice for someone who is trying to help their friend, for example, who is dealing with relapsing, but they are often surrounded by people who aren't the best influence on them?
So yeah, that's a tricky part. Again, it comes down to just being there for them and not necessarily telling them what to do. You might want to question them on it. And questioning is always a good option. Instead of telling someone, you just question them. You're saying, hey, you know what? I'm worried. Like, what do you think of your friends? Do you think that they're helping you? What are your triggers for using substances? Are some individuals facilitating those triggers? So engaging with your friend about that, I think, is very important. Talk about whether they feel that their social circles are impacting them. So ask them if they feel that is the case. Like, do you think that your circles are affecting your substance use? Do you feel that you're peer pressured into using substances? Do you think this is the healthiest relationship for you? I find that questions is often a better way to go about sort of dealing with these things, as opposed to downright telling them that you think that this is the situation, that you think that their friends are a bad influence on them. But also showing love and compassion as well. So saying, hey, I'm here for you. I just want you to know that if you ever want to seek help, or if you need someone else to talk to, just reach out. I'm right here, right? Any given time, any given day. So that's kind of the way I approach this.
Yeah, I mean, I had another question. So thank you for, all your input in terms of like, what's going on. We learned a lot, especially just the frontal lobe and stuff. That was really cool just to know about how like that aspect plays in with all this. But, a question that I've been thinking, like apart from like, I guess the addiction aspect, but do you think that the location, the geographic aspect plays a crucial role, just because sometimes it might be not only just because how you were raised, but where you're from, maybe your financial aspect, maybe your people around you. So how do you think like the location or the geographical aspect plays into this, rather than like how you were raised, like how you grew up?
Yeah, like, I mean, and it's really hard to say how this all plays together. But in terms of geographic location, yeah, like we know that if you have less sunlight, you can feel more depressed. And that does spur on more substance use. So more northern communities, for example, you can see sort of perhaps more use there. The other thing too, though, is that if you feel displaced as an individual because of your geographic location, and you feel culturally displaced, that can be a huge issue, right? We see this with a lot of our indigenous populations. I mean, Kamloops is forefront right now, right? In terms of what's been going on with our indigenous communities and people's minds. And we literally ripped them away from their families, their culture, their identity, and we placed them in something that was unfamiliar, in a different geographic location, in a culturally different location. And robbing someone of of those roots can be a very strong trigger towards mental health and addiction concerns. And so I think I can see how that would play a role as well. Growing up in a community that's different than you, that doesn't culturally jive with who you are as an individual and the culture that you belong to, or the culture that your family and your parents belong to. So, I mean, I can see that very much playing a role in this, but we also know that social determinants of health, which is what you kind of brought up, Rijin, is also there. So, for instance, if you are experiencing homelessness, you have more stress in life, and you therefore probably have more mental health concerns and probably more addiction concerns. And there's a correlation between those, right? So it's extremely important that we take care of those things, that we provide.
We have one comment and one question from the audience. So the comment is from Samia Rahman. She's saying, kudos to the team at Youth for Change to raise the mental health awareness, especially during COVID-19. This forum, way to go. And we have a question from Maria Yusuf. She's saying, how can one maintain a good mental health?
Yeah, like really in terms of maintaining good mental health. I'm not a mental health expert, just so you guys are aware. I'm an addictions and internal medicine specialist. But some of the key things that you can do is just do overall wellness and mindfulness checks, right? Things that I find are really important for mental health is making sure that you limit the amount of stress that you have if you can. You can do things like mindfulness, like meditation, breathing exercises, to calm yourself and to sort of ground yourself. Doing things of altruistic things like helping others can be very positive. Exercising, eating healthy is another thing that you can do. All of these things that just affect your overall wellness as an individual can hugely impact your overall mental health. And I'm sure there's other things out there as well, but that's it in a nutshell.
Amazing, because I personally believe that self-care and mental health, they're a big part of your everyday life. So it's always good to give yourself some time to relax, and always good to focus on your mental health. Like sometimes if there's too much Zoom meetings, then I agree with you. It's good to give yourself time. It's good to focus on your mental health. So I totally agree with you. That was really good. Is there any more questions from the audience?
Yeah, I had a question. I mean, like this is more about like the personal aspect. Like, just something about you, like just to know about you. Like, what do you like? Like, I guess something that got you into this field? Just really curious about it. Just like, what motivated you to kind of get into this field? Because I know that some people, they want to be doctors, engineers. I just wanted to get your point of view.
Yeah, you know what? That's a hard question. I feel like for myself, there was a journey, and it had different turns, and sort of like led me to this field. The one thing I always knew I wanted to do was like global health. So that was working in rural nations and helping those who are vulnerable across and overseas. But my career pivoted. Family circumstances dictated I had to move back home and be closer to home. And one of my mentors showed me that there was no need to travel overseas to provide health and support for people. We've got just as many problems here at home. And so working with people who are experiencing homelessness, a lot of racialized communities, you start to see just the impact that this system has had on their health as a whole. So like it comes down to, as I mentioned earlier, like social determinants of health. Like, if we don't take care of certain aspects of of society and supports for them, that their health is not going to get better. So for instance, I have patients who have really bad diabetes and they're homeless. And the answer to helping them with their diabetes isn't getting them insulin. It's not getting them medication coverage or getting them medication. The actual answer is just getting them housed. Getting them housed, giving them some stability and safety is one step in the process that helps decrease their overall diabetes. And then there's food security is the next piece to that. So instead of them always eating whatever they can scavenge for, getting them proper meals through food security can really be helpful too to get their diabetes under control. But these are not interventions where I have to put someone on medications. These are just basic things for human life. These are just basic needs that need to be met and need to be provided for. And addiction is one of those pieces. Like the way to treat addiction isn't necessarily to get people into treatment facilities or to get them on medications. It's to get them a house, give them some stability, give them some support, show them that that there's other resources that are out there that they can engage with to get them identification, provide them with that food security. So that could be just as powerful of an intervention as any sort of medical intervention can be.
We have a question from the audience from Raman or Arana Khalid. How do you differentiate between sadness and depression?
These are some good mental health questions. Again, I'm not necessarily a mental health specialist, but one of the big things is the severity of your depression and sadness. Like sadness is usually temporary. There's usually an event that leads to sadness. Depression sometimes is that there is no event. There can be events sometimes, but if there is no set event that has caused you to feel sad, and that could be depression. And if it's long lasting as well. So sadness shouldn't last 3 solid months. It can sometimes, but it shouldn't. And so if you have these symptoms for a longer period of time, it might be worthwhile getting that checked out and seeing if you actually have depression, figuring out why you're in a funk, if you may.
Does anyone have any more questions from the audience or Jessenia, Rijin, Cynthia, anyone?
Yeah, I had one question. This is about like this addictions. Now because of like COVID-19 and how like there's a lot of dependability on just like technology and that kind of thing. So, have you seen any recent, I guess, cases where there's a lot of like addictions just related to technology, like how people becoming more dependent on like technology and how that escalated many other issues?
Yeah, I have actually. So when you look at what we call the DSM-5, which is our probably the most universally used form of diagnosing a disorder, a substance use disorder, or quote unquote an addiction, even though it's not really called an addiction. It doesn't include some behavioral addictions, right? Apart from gambling. But in other definitions of addiction, you can see these definitions of sex addiction, for example, a video gaming addiction, of internet addiction and social media. So these things can be there, and have I seen them because of COVID? Yeah, I have. A lot of people are trying to occupy their time in different means, but it means that they're getting really hooked onto other things that have impacted their wellness overall. And that's kind of the key definition of addiction. Is it, are you doing something so much that's affecting your overall wellness as an individual and your overall wellness, or your overall obligation to yourself, your family, and society? So those are sort of the factors that come into play here. But yeah, like with COVID-19, I do see people, spending more time on social media, spending more time on video gaming. The question is, can they plug out of that when things start to normalize with COVID?
Yeah, I guess that's something that we'll have to see in the next few months or so, if people are able to make that transition. And I know a lot of people have been spending time at home and on technology a lot of the times, because that's, our one way to connect with people, but also recognizing what's safe, and like where your limits lie, and being able to draw those boundaries are super important.
I agree. I have a question. Do you think right now during this time we might become addicted to technology due to the situation of being in a lockdown, and after the life goes back to normal and we are done with the COVID lockdown in the near future, do you think that that mental health cases will increase or decrease?
These are really good questions. I don't know for sure. I do think that hopefully once we start to have more social engagement with each other and our society is a bit more free and open, I do think mental health cases will probably decrease. Like, I don't have a crystal ball here to tell you to tell you the answer, but that's what I think we're all hoping for, is that when things open up, mental health issues will decrease, that we'll be more socially active and engaged with each other, and that we can return to some sort of normalcy, right? But there is a chance that might not happen. There might be a chance that some of us have been so traumatized by COVID-19 that our mental health may not be normalized. We may not be able to socialize the way we used to socialize before. Now, that being said, I just wanted to sort of iterate that even though we are afraid of the mental health burdens of COVID-19, that doesn't take away from practicing good public health policies and practicing physical distancing and wearing a mask and keeping a safe distance from others. Self-isolating, quarantining if you may, when you need to. So these are still important measures to take, because it's not just the mental health that we have to protect. We have to also protect our physical health and overall well-being.
I was just going to say thank you, Dr. Ghosh, for coming to Youth for Change, Youth Empowering series today. It was an amazing session. We hope you enjoyed the session, and thank you everyone for joining the conversation and your comments on Youth for Change, Youth Empowering series. For next week's session, Rijin will discuss what is it about.
Thank you, Dr. Monty Ghosh. It was really, cool, amazing to have you here. We learned a lot, all of us. So thank you once again for taking the time, to attend this. It's been helpful for all the community and, who we're going to share it with. Yeah, so in terms of the next week's session, we'll be talking about all the problems in the digital world. So I know that, types of cybercrimes would be like hacking, identity thefts, online frauds, and many more. And so, we'll be talking about how youth have been specifically impacted, and how, as young people, how we can be better aware of and safe in the digital world. And not only that, we'll talk about, the safety tips, how we can be more safe online, how cybercrimes put, our rights at risk, how we are manipulated by companies, and how we are manipulated in terms of, like, I guess, scammed in a way. And we'll talk about the cyberbullying too, and how youth can cope with many of the issues that cyberbullying has caused, and how many of the problem has been escalated just because of technology. And above all, we'll be joined by the one and only Sarah Bowers Peters. She's an amazing person, and she's also a program coordinator for Crime Stoppers Wellington, and she's also the director of the Ontario Association of Crime Stoppers. So she'll be talking about what do Crime Stoppers do, and how they all tie in with the the online and digital world, and some of the cases that she's been seeing, some of the crimes, and how what the job they do is really crucial to keeping us safe, and how how it might help us as as young people. So please join us for next week. We look forward to meeting you guys. Please make sure that you guys have followed us on Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube. And if you would like to be part of the Youth Empowerment series and come on the show with us, please fill out the form and the event registration on our website at youthforchange.ca/get involved. So thank you, everyone, and thank you especially Dr. Monty Ghosh.
Yes, and we have 2 comments from the audience. Shebrin Rahman says thank you, and Lynn McEntee says shout out to Dr. Monty Ghosh. Very informative. So thank you, Dr. Monty Ghosh. It was a pleasure.
It was a pleasure to speak with you today. Thank you so much. And for everyone who attended, we hope you learned something new and can take some interesting information away about mental health. And we look forward to seeing you again on Wednesday next week for the next session. Thank you and have an amazing evening.